to the debate over same-sex marriage, ladies and gentlemen. The debate continues in the Supreme Court before a 5-judge constitution bench over the legal recognition of same-sex marriage. The hearing will resume tomorrow as petitioners argue that the LGBTQ community seeks a life of dignity via the institution of marriage as a constitutional right. They also argue that marriage is also a means to help assimilate queer individuals into society and eradicate social stigma. On day one, the Chief Justice of India suggested that for now, the matter should be restricted to the Special Marriage Act and not personal laws. Today, the Chief Justice of India also highlighted that there is no absolute concept of a man or woman, saying society has moved beyond traditional gender norms. The centre, however, reiterated its stand that the legal validation of same-sex marriage will damage societal values, saying it is much more than a legal contract between two individuals. The centre has also called the demand for same-sex marriage an urban elitist view, claiming that recognizing it means rewriting an entire branch of law. Now, today, the centre filed a fresh affidavit calling for states to be made a party to the hearing. The move is clearly aimed at boosting the culture argument, as there is political consensus across the country that same-sex marriage hampers traditional values. But here is where the argument of former Attorney General Mukul Rohatgi, who represents the petitioners, gains relevance. Now, Mukul Rohatgi said in court, when the Hindu Code came, Parliament wasn't ready. He also said that Ambedkar quit as law minister when the Hindu Code wasn't accepted. The Hindu Code we know today, this is what Mukul Rohatgi said, came in a truncated manner. He also said the Hindu Widows Remarriage Act came in the 1800s when society was unprepared even in the 1900s. The Supreme Court must push society to acknowledge the LGBTQ community as equals. That is the pitch coming in from Mukul Rohatgi in the top court. He also says we rely on the prestige and moral authority of the court. When the highest court clears the right to marry, that will drive society. That pitch coming in from Mukul Rohatgi in the top court. He also said the Supreme Court must understand its role as the final protector of fundamental rights. That's the piece of breaking news that's coming in. And that is the pitch coming in from Mukul Rohatgi as this debate inside the Supreme Court continues to rage. Arguments will continue tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen. But joining me on the broadcast is Sharif Rangnekar, author and director of the Rainbow Literature Festival. Thank you, Sharif, for joining us on CNN News 18 and sharing your perspective on this debate that is raging in the top court. My first question, Sharif, is how do you react to the stand of the central government that the LGBTQ fight for marriage equality is an urban elitist view, meaning that this issue does not affect India as a whole?
Well, I think this is just a very weak and hollow defense from the government. I think they're just out of depth, and they don't seem to know what else to put in front as a stumbling block. The first thing is, I think it was made clear during the hearings today that two of the petitioners, one is Zaina Patnaik, a trans woman. She was on the streets begging at one point in time in her life. She made her life what it is today. And she had started to work with KPMG many years later. She's definitely not an urban elite. Akai Padmashila was the other person is another petitioner who was thrown out of her home at the age of 15. She begged. She found a way out to become an important activist in the mainstream world. She's not urban elite. Let's go into a few more cases of people who may or may not have been, or not petitioners necessarily, but people who want love and have relationships. If we remember a few years ago when Duti Chand came out from small town India, she made it amply clear that she was in love with someone and she wanted to get married. And there is history being recorded, which I'm a little surprised that the government is not reading enough of literature. There's a book by Ruth Vanita, and in that book, she has documented, I think, a case which goes back to 1987 or 88, where two police women, I think their names were Leela Andi and Urmila Srivastav, they got married. There is a case which is in the later years amongst these recorded marriage functions that have taken place, or ceremonies, of two Bodo women. So like that is happening across. So it's pretty misplaced. And it's just trying to sort of fuel a perception amongst the larger public, who perhaps is unaware too, that there's an assumption to sort of build, or a picture to build, that everything that is being argued on queer rights is Western.
Mhm.
So there's a complete dismissal of of fundamental rights, of dignity, as well as of our own history in the subcontinent. You see, the once a government or a state starts dismissing the truth, then they're also dismissing the roles of gods that they worship, right? They essentially also trying to say Mohini did exist. They don't want to discuss Lord Krishna's various avatars, Vishnu, Shikhandi. There is Ardhanareshwara. There's so much out there. Is that Western? So, or is there urban elite? So
Mhm.
I think they're just out of arguments right now. They're just trying to put all kinds of things in there, perhaps to play to a certain section of society, which maybe their electorate.
Right. And Sharif, these fears that that the government has raised in this entire debate, that society is not ready, there will be an adverse impact on the cultural status quo, there will be an adverse impact on children as well. That is one of the arguments made by the other side. Do you see a repeat of the arguments used to deny women the right to vote, to deny women spaces in the workplace?
I think, you see, I mean, I don't want to generalize, everyone who thinks like that. Okay, if we, as Mukul Rohatgi referred to two instances when it came to women, but there is more, right? At one point in time, the argument generally from not just the central government, but from people who think similarly, even religious groups, they talk of sanskar, right? That's the same sort of mindset that was used against when sati was being abolished, when dowry was being banned, when child marriage was being. Till these bans, or till the laws didn't change, till the courts didn't intervene, all of that was part of sanskar. And that was supposed to be dharma. That was supposed to be the way our religion is, or that's the way culture should function, how society should function. So these kind of things have happened from time and again at different points in time. And I think in 1956, when we talk about the Hindu Marriage Act, till 1956, a man could marry as many women as they wished. They could maintain or look after them or not. It was their choice. They didn't have to look after the children also at that time. So and that at that point in time, if we just read into that history, we would know that the same sort of mindsets were averse to these changes. So I'm not surprised at the way certain groups are responding, but I believe that the courts know better. And I believe from even hearing, even more convincing, has been the way the bench has been responding since the last 2 days, and looking at finding a solution, because they recognize the aspect of dignity, they recognize the aspect of self-respect. And as Menaka Guruswamy said today, a point that I think a lot of us talk about so often, that there are a number of civil rights that are within the ambit of these laws on the Marriage Act. It's not the problem of marriage. We can still get married. Tomorrow, if my mother and my partner's mother decides that we should have a marriage ceremony, we can. Nothing stops us from doing so. But we don't have those rights that protect that marriage, that secures that marriage. And that's what Menaka a point that she was making in the courts today about insurance, about banking, then there is healthcare. There's just so many things attached, because there are too many laws which seem to come from the idea of who a blood relative is. See, otherwise, but if marriage itself as a structure today and didn't have these civil rights, and it revolved around a choice and around love, then we wouldn't be in the courts fighting for this. We'd be fighting for different rights under them, right? We'd be going workplace inclusion. We'd say we should be secure there. We would be addressing so many other things that come within the civil rights space. So I think uh, that's the reason we're fighting, and we're not taking anything away from anyone. And I don't think society is that weak as being projected by the government and other people who think like that. I think society is far more resilient, stronger. They've seen so many changes over the years. I mean, to just suddenly say that society cannot handle this, it will create havoc. And words like that, I think, is trying to paint society in a very poor light.
Absolutely, and I agree with you on that point that society is way more resilient,
It's
at the end of the
yeah,
day. And I completely agree
yeah,
with this point that beyond the traditional argument, the fact that
yeah.
marriage is a legal contract between two individuals, that is what you're fighting for under the Indian Constitution. The statement of the Chief Justice of India, Sharif, on gender fluidity, do you see that as taking away from the central premise of the same-sex marriage argument? Are we conflating two issues when talking about marriage equality?
No, I think his see, one is I'm sure that the Chief Justice understands gender and sexuality a lot better than many other people. But I think the point that he was trying to make is not to limit the idea of marriage and limit a man, a male, and a female and a woman purely by genitals. This, I think, the point he was trying to make. And so he was essentially going not just into the aspect of gender fluidity or sexuality, but he was also going, I think, in a certain direction which he perhaps was hinting at, because this comes up so often, that marriage is about procreation, that there is a dharma attached, right? Because we live in a country where over 90% of marriages are arranged, and it's almost an immediate expectation that at a certain time that the wife will give birth. So he's trying to, I think, address this point, which is mentioned also in a different manner in the verdict on 377, that marriage is not necessarily about procreation. So essentially, marriage is also about love, and it is not limited by the gender or sexuality or genitals. Because there's this constant thing that everyone says, oh, but why do you want to get married? Bacche to hone chahiye. And there's an assumption that the whole structure of of marriage and runs around the fact that children will be produced. So I think as a queer person, as people who believe in marriage, believe in love marriage, believe in these kind of choices, would know that they would rather, if they were to have children, it would be out of love and not out of dharma and duty. So I think they have to get out of that mindset. And I think he was leading to so many other things, but he wanted to clarify that there is no absolute understanding of what a man is and what a woman is. So he
Right,
was going into the sexuality bit.
right.
It's quite brilliant, I thought.
Right. My final question to you, Sharif. Let's say the Supreme Court bench says same-sex marriage is constitutionally valid. There will still be an uphill battle to codify it, which will require willing governments and members of parliament. Are we just midway in a long journey?
See, I think firstly we should understand that marriage is not the end game. We're still living in a world, and we're still living in a world where so many queer people are dying of suicide, being thrown out of their homes. There's a lot to be done on anti-discrimination, so that people can find love, feel safe first, find love, love themselves, to feel sort of fitting into a world, right? Now, definitely, we've seen with Nalsa, it took so long for state governments. I don't think people should just blame the central government here. State governments took long to act on the transgender related Nalsa judgment from the Supreme Court of 2014. If we look at even 2018, states and centers were told in that verdict, it was part of the verdict, to sensitize society through campaigns, through this, that, and the other, sensitize the police, sensitize healthcare people. There are many things stated. That really hasn't happened. That has happened by a few, state governments here and there, and they go around to town, trying to say that they're doing something for us. They're only doing what the court had told them they must do. So it will take a long time. But I mean, it could even happen faster. Suppose the courts put a timeline to it, say by X number of this thing you need to bring these amendments in, and it will happen. And but I think even the order can change the mood. Even the order can give hope that we can now start fighting for other, uh, civil rights, anti-bullying, inheritance, so many other things that are there, access to healthcare. But it gives it's that to expect any government to do something overnight, I think is uh, is too much to expect, and it will call for a lot of political will, irrespective of who's at the center.
Absolutely.
So we've got time. We'll have to be patient, but that doesn't stop, I think, for people from fighting and raising their voice on these issues.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sharif, for sharing your perspective.
Thanks.
More power to you and the movement to achieve all these rights mandated under the Constitution. And hopefully the Supreme Court, is on the right side of history when it comes to this. But let's shift focus to